Airports connect travelers and products to destinations across regions, nations, and the world. Due to this rapid connective capacity, airports have substantial economic impacts on their communities. However, these connections were the focus of restrictions in the midst of a global pandemic because the same potential to provide access to people and products as a hub of long-distance travel can also serve as an opportunity to spread a virus. As the scientific community studied the specifics of the virus, including transmission rates, countries across the world placed restrictions on international travel. The objective of this paper was to explore the temporal effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on flight operations at airports in the United States, in addition to an examination of the differences between various classifications of airports. These effects and changes in demand are important considerations for airport infrastructure investments. This analysis includes airports in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, known as the NIPIAS. The two broad categories of airports included in the analysis are general aviation and commercial service airports. The vast majority, over 90%, of the airports included in the study were general aviation airports, which do not offer regularly scheduled commercial flights. Therefore, most airports primarily serve aircraft owned by individuals, businesses, and other organizations, and not commercial airlines. Commercial service airports, which also facilitate general aviation flight operations in addition to commercial operations, are publicly owned airports with at least 2,500 annual enplanements and scheduled air carrier service, while general aviation airports do not have scheduled air carrier service or have scheduled service with fewer than 2,500 passenger boardings each year. So now we're going to look at one of the graphs that's in this paper. This is looking at population and percent change in flight operations. So we're looking at the population that's within 30 miles of a given airport, and we're looking at the percent change in flight operations between calendar year 2019 and calendar year 2020. So we're starting here with the commercial service airports, and each point represents a decile, or the maximum population within that decile for the commercial service airports, and the corresponding percent change in flight operations. Within this population scale, we need to be careful what we're looking at. This is a logarithmic scale. So our first point here is 10,000 in population within 30 miles, then 100,000, 1 million, and 10 million. So that log scale enables us to show all of this on one graph in kind of a compact format. So when we look at these points, we can see at the highest end of the spectrum, we've got a group of airports in the decile that has a maximum of over 10 million people within 30 miles of the airport, experienced the largest decline from 2019 to 2020 in flight operations of almost 40%. We can see a similar line for general aviation. So we're showing this again in deciles. We've got the same scales, population on the x-axis, change in flight operations on the y-axis. And so throughout this population spectrum, using these deciles of population, the general aviation airports experience lower declines in flight operations than their commercial service airports relative to those 2019 flight levels. This graph again shows the upper bound of each decile. So for each point here, each decile, the maximum population of that decile is graphed. And for both types of airports, the airports with the least declines in flight operations were in areas with populations of under 100,000 people within 30 miles. So lower than 100,000 gave us the best performance in terms of flight operations between comparing 2019 to 2020. At 2 deciles for general aviation airports, the second and the third, so these points here, and these represent populations between 12,000 and 76,000 within 30 miles of the airport. The number of flights in 2020 actually exceeded the number of flights in 2019. So I know we heard a lot about restrictions in travel 2019 to 2020, but actually there are a couple of groups of general aviation airports, and these are grouped by population surrounding the airport, actually increased the number of flights from 2019 to 2020. And that fourth decile, with a population of about 121,000, is roughly at parity with the 2019 values. Outside of that range, higher and lower populations experience more substantial declines in flight operations. And similarly, the second decile for commercial service airports experience the lowest levels of flight decreases. So we're looking at this point here, with increasing populations experiencing substantially worse changes in flights. And here's a table that we have that summarizes those points of population and the percent change 2019 to 2020.